everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to begin my July reading wrap-up with Crow Lake by Mary Lawson. So it is only the 6th day of July, and this book, I don't even remember exactly the day I started it. I started it like a day or two before the beginning of the month, but I've read it in about a week. And I read it so fast because I loved it so much. It was really, really good. This book is a family drama. It doesn't have a ton of plot in it, so if you're someone that likes plot, then maybe proceed with caution. But this story follows Kate Morrison, and she is the third sibling out of 4 siblings. And they experience the tragedy of losing their parents. And this is like on the synopsis, so I'm not, doing much. It's set in Northern Ontario, and it also references the Gaspé in Quebec, which I thought was great. And it's the story of these 4 siblings and the choices they make in their lives and who they are and how they relate to each other and how they relate to the people around them as they navigate this very tricky world of being orphaned. And I was excited to read it, but I had no idea how wrapped up in the story I would get. I just felt compelled to keep reading it. And I can't even exactly explain that. I don't think that it would necessarily have the same effect on everyone else. There's something about it that just captured me, and I was unable to stop reading it. It's very, very readable. Lawson's writing style is very flowing. I mean, it's also a first-person narrative, which I think it's Kate who's taking us through the story, so it's her perspective that we're getting, and I think that always makes a story quite easy to follow because you just have one person. It does kind of move from present to past, but the movement between the present and past is very, very well done, very smooth. There's not a lot of you're not struggling to understand where you are in the story, and you do have a protagonist who grows and changes through the course of the story, which is, I think, what you're always looking for. I think that Kate's perspective could frustrate some people. I think near the end I started to get a little bit impatient with her, or a little bit annoyed by her perspective, and I think that's exactly at the point where the author took her and kind of shifted her and made her see differently, and that's what she needed, and that's what everyone, I think, by that point in the story wants, is for her to let go of certain perspectives that she's held on to that have caused her to cause others pain or discomfort. So it's a family saga. It's about loving and knowing your siblings. It's about sacrifice. It's about who you truly are in relation to where you come from, but also who you're meant to be. There's a lot of great themes in here. There's a lot that people could impact. Rural, small town, and like almost no town, like rural living, the community that's built up around rural living, the support, but also the traditions of a family, and how those things can be passed down, and people act out these roles without actually questioning them, without actually standing up to them. So there's a lot in here. There's also another family in the town that is featured in the story, and that family's story is much more or is also tragic. I mean, the death of the parents is very tragic. But this story is more violent and tragic. And that story also has some lessons. That family experience is also some important reflection for people in terms of lineage and how we move through the world based on who our parents were, based on who our grandparents were, based on family history. So there's a lot in here. And I read this for my Reading Across Canada book, and so I definitely will read more of Mary Lawson. I can't say that her other plots are appealing to me as much. Maybe her newest one that was nominated for the Booker, I believe it was nominated for the Booker, will be one I'll try in the future, but this was really, I really liked this, and it just fit perfectly in this moment, in this reading for me. So very strong start to July, and I will check in again when I have finished another book. Hey everyone, I finished The White Bone by Barbara Gowdy last night, and this was a fantastic read. I am so glad that my sister recommended this to me. It didn't really end exactly how I wanted, but I think the ending kept consistent with the way the story was told in a very raw and realistic way, I would think, in terms of how the animal kingdom works and how there's a different sentiment and a different reality for animals that humans don't understand or share. And I think that the author just really captured something new in this novel that is just not, it's just not something that I think a lot of people understand or contemplate that often, is how the lives of animals really are. And this is a really unique novel. I've never read anything like it. I think that it is an amazing feat. And yeah, I'm really, really glad that I read it. And I would recommend it if you are interested in the lives of animals, although with the caveat that this is there's a lot of violence in here. There's a lot of gory kind of the reality of living in the African Sahara and like being an animal and not having human sensibilities about things. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking of reading this. And also, if you don't like reading about animal cruelty, then I probably wouldn't read it either, because this is about elephants trying to get away from humans who are slaughtering them, and they're trying to find a safe place, and the white bone is what will lead them there. And we're mostly following one herd of elephants, Mud being our main character, who has a very unique and wonderful story. But there's also a few supporting elephants that are super interesting to read about, and some other animals. And so yeah, I would recommend this. Hey everyone, so I realized that I finished The Lonely City by Olivia Laing, and I haven't given you a wrap-up of that, so I'm going to do that now. I really enjoyed this book. Olivia Laing, this is my second of her books. I really like her writing style. She wove her own personal experience of loneliness in New York City into talking about different artists throughout, the history, throughout different periods of New York. And I thought that she did that brilliantly. I obviously love books that feature artists, learning about new artists. I discovered the work of David Wojnarowicz. I hope I'm saying his name right. I'll put his name here so you can see how it's spelt. I had not heard of his work before this book, and I really loved looking him up and learning more about him. She focused mostly on men, but there were a few women that she mentions as well. Billie Holiday, Valerie Solanas, and I think a couple others, though they're not ringing a bell right now, but a lot about Andy Warhol. And what I liked was that she wove everyone in, and they felt very much alive and part of the narrative throughout. So it wasn't just a list of different people she was talking about, but she was always circling back and relating different scenarios and different points to those artists and what she had talked about before in relation to them without being repetitive. And I thought that was brilliantly done. It's a great book. It talks about loneliness as a state, as a state of being, as a mindset. It talks about loneliness as from her own personal perspective, and I thought all of it was really, really interesting and made me think about loneliness. I'm not someone that feels lonely very often. It's not an emotion or a state that I lament very much. There are certain scenarios that I feel it in, but I certainly had not ever felt the way she felt lonely in New York, Olivia Laing herself, as she describes in the narrative. But I thought it was great, and I listened to it on audio, as you know. The narrator was good. I think I'm going to buy the book, though. I really want to have my own copy. I will definitely, I think, revisit it in future. So having my own copy, I think, would be great. So I'm really happy that I've read 2 of her books now, and I liked both of them. And I will check in again when I have finished another book. Hey, everyone. So I finished Looking for Jane by Heather Marshall last night. And this book had one of those things that I hate happen in it, which I can't reveal without spoiling this book. This book has 3 characters that you're following: Evelyn and Angela and Nancy. They're in different eras, but they're interconnected. So Evelyn is our young mother who is pregnant and is in a home for girls where they're going to remove her child. Nancy is in the next generation, experiencing abortion and helping with the underground abortion movement. And Angela is the modern day woman who gets wrapped up in a mysterious situation from the past. Throughout all this, you're learning history, but after reading the author's note, it's a scenario that was set up in multiple cities across North America during the time when abortion was illegal, before Roe v. Wade in the States and before 1988, I believe, in Canada. So at the time, like when I was reading it, I thought that I was reading something that actually happened. It's not quite that. She kind of created the network based on different networks that she researched. So this isn't, and obviously this is because these people were operating illegally underground. So it's not like they kept meticulous records of their actions. They couldn't, or those records would incriminate them. So she had to kind of put these things together based on her observation, like based on conjecture, based on like research that she compiled things. So great. So all the information I learned, like there was some very compelling story in here about being a mother, choosing to have a child or not, having that choice taken away, all those things that are super, super important. But the overall, the ending and the way that that plot twist happened just soured me to the book, unfortunately. Hey everyone. Okay, so I finished another book, Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit. If you're familiar with Rebecca's work, she is a feminist writer, and Men Explain Things to Me was one of her seminal essays that kind of went viral and created a whole way of describing a certain type of way that men can speak to women. It started from a very funny real life situation that happened to her, where she was at a dinner party. She was talking with the host of this dinner party, and he proceeded to ask her what she did for a living. She said she was a writer. She named the topic that she had written on and had just published a book on. And then he proceeded to talk over her, explaining to her that, the book was there's a new book about it, and had she read this book, because this was the book that was like the expert piece on this particular subject, and she kept trying to explain to him that that was her book, she was that author, and it took a very long time to get that point across to him. And it took someone else in the room saying to him, that's her book. So it kind of grew from that situation and evolved into someone else coining the term mansplaining. And this is the essay. It's a very quick and under the radar little essay. I kind of expected it to be something more profound, but it was really just an anecdotal kind of story with some statistics around violence against women. And so this book has a collection of different essays that kind of focus on that topic. Feminism in the early 2000s and 2010s. It's interesting. I really enjoyed reading it, but I can't say that that anything in it was super impactful to me. I mean, it was hard to read at times because of the statistics she's talking about, and I think that a lot of the examples that she cites here are kind of dated in the fact that the way that sorry, I was interrupted there. Phone calls and texts. Anyway, needless to say, I'm glad I read this. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here. It does feel slightly dated in terms of the examples and statistics that she's using, and that's to be expected when you're reading something that these are essays that are written about current events, and so current things change, and it's just inevitable that they're not going to have the same impact now, but it's still really important. There's a lot of important information in here about what was happening in the past as well. There's some parts that that actually are referencing other things that she has, like Wolf's Darkness, Embracing the Inexplicable from 2009. That essay was actually really interesting, talking about Solnit's personal relationship with a lot of Wolf's writing and some other writers as well, Susan Sontag as well. So there's still a lot in here that I think is valuable to read, but obviously it's not the most recent in terms of statistics and data around violence against women and women in the media and things like that, but it is still a really good indicator of the evolution of this type of writing and this type of information sharing. So I'm glad I read it, and I will check in again when I finish another book. Good morning, everybody. I finished Richmond Now and Then, an Anecdotal History by Nick Fonda last night. Just going to briefly wrap this one because this is a local author to my hometown in Richmond, Quebec. And this is, I believe, his second book about the Richmond area. And it's kind of a collection of, I think, essays he wrote over the years about different people who lived in the town, everything from settlers to there is a fairly extensive essay about the history of the Abenaki, who were a First Nation that eventually lived on the St. Francis River where Richmond was built. They were actually displaced from another area, moved to that area, but were always kind of nomadic. So there's that in here. There's a lot of different anecdotes about different business owners, different settlers at different times over the course of the building of the town, the building of the railways around that area. It's interesting because it has an earlier history than a lot of the history I learn about in this part of Canada that I live in, because we settlers came here later. So learning about all that and hearing some familiar names and learning some of the history behind some of the areas where I grew up was really great, and it gave me a nice feeling of connection to my town. And as I'm making the art piece about my town, it just gave me that nice little connection to the place. So it's a great little collection of essays if you're ever interested in a local history type book. And that is all for now. I will check in again when I finish another book. Hey everybody. So my last finish of July is Foxfire's Confessions of a Girl Gang by Joyce Carol Oates. And this was an addition to my July TBR. I didn't talk about this one in my initial TBR video. So there's layers and layers of reasons why I wanted to read this book. One of them being that Joyce Carol Oates is a really popular author who's written so many novels. I think Eric Carl Anderson on BookTube is one of her big fans and like promoters of her work. So I'd never read any of her work. She writes across multiple genres. She's written with pseudonyms. She writes prolifically. So the reason I chose this book is because of the film of the same name, which came out in 1996. And I'm not going to go into how it compares to how the film and the book compare, because that'll be for another video. I also believe I need to do a full review on this book, because when I looked for one on BookTube, there was one and it was strangely inadequate in my opinion. And I also am reading this in a kind of secret TBR type situation with some other books based on a video I did last year. So I'm going to be talking about it in several different ways, which I think it warrants, because to put it mildly, this book is rather revolutionary, I think, in some ways, and probably underrated. So the inadequate review that I listened to about this explained this book as YA. I had no idea or inclination that it was written as YA as I was reading it. This is set in the 1950s in kind of small town, working class town, New York State. This is the story of underprivileged women who find each other and create a gang culture within their group that is called Foxfire. And that is a culture that they are familiar with because there are many male gangs that exist around them. They are all from, pretty underprivileged backgrounds. They are all struggling with different things, and they come together. So this book is about female friendship. It's about female anger. It is about violence and kind of recklessness and the kind of repercussions of that. It's written in a kind of confessional diary style where one of the members of the gang, Maddie, is looking back on her role as the chronicler of their group. It's a very brief period of their lives from about the age of 14 to 16 or 17. And so that is kind of the premise of this book. I'm not going to get into all the details and what I struggled with it at the beginning because the narrator's voice is very unique. But once I got into it, it really started to roll, and it really started to push some boundaries that I think are great. So I would recommend it, and I'm going to do a review of it, and I will talk more about it in some future videos. So check it out.